Joining me now here on set, Yamiche Alcindor, NBC News Washington correspondent, moderator of PBS's Washington Week. Psaki, the former White House press secretary for President Biden and also an MSNBC host, and Republican strategist Matt Gorman. Matt, I want to start with that. Ron DeSantis, actually, this is the riskiest move he's made yet inside the Republican Party. He's basically put his finger on the scale. He's calling for the ouster of Ronna McDaniel. I don't know if he's got the votes, but it's interesting that he's willing to do it.
I saw that when it popped to just about an hour ago. I was very surprised.
You're right, he's risk averse.
He absolutely is, and you know what? He should be. There's very little incentive up to this point.
This is a weird thing for him to engage in.
It is, but it's an internal battle, right? Like even Trump has been kind of on the sidelines with it. But you're right. He's been very cautious, been very silent, not being weighing into the battles. I'm curious, kind of what the calculus was for this. I really don't know.
I would think he's got smart enough people around him. So he must think that he must really believe the numbers are there. Anyway.
Maybe, obviously, even if he doesn't win, he can take credit for a better than expected showing. Because the numbers will leak. We all know that.
Yeah.
But yeah.
All right. It does sound like, and I'm not going to get into gamifying this too much, but if Ronna McDaniel's not winning on the first ballot, she may not be winning. Mm-hmm. I think that there's probably something to that. But I want to talk about the bigger picture here that I was trying to write, Yamiche, and that is, and I don't know whether Donald Trump is I know we all know he's a symptom more than anything else, but it does feel like everybody is stuck until he leaves the scene.
Well, as we were talking about sort of who might be the next RNC chair, I had to say as a reporter, I'm thinking, does it really matter? Do we think that the RNC chair is the person who's really the one that's driving the message in the Republican Party? Do we think they're the ones that of course, I'm not saying that it's not something that we should cover, but what I'm saying is that in terms of the actual idea of the GOP and the DNA of the party, it is completely wrapped in Donald Trump. This is a party that spent in 2012 when I was getting pulled into meetings about how they were going to have different messaging and they were going to go after African Americans with this kind of messaging. And Sean Spicer was walking around town telling people, here's what all these people are going to do in the party. And then Donald Trump comes and does the exact opposite of what they want, but somehow gets more Latino voters than they would have ever expected. So to me, it is a party that I think that is very much stuck on Trump until he bows out or until he is beat to a pulp by Ron DeSantis, possibly.
And I'd argue, Jen, in some ways, the current structure of Washington, even the Biden White House, even the congressional Democrats, in some ways, everything's organized messaging-wise around him.
That's true.
I mean, right?
Because there's nothing more unifying for Democrats than Donald Trump. That is the best fundraising tool. That is the best motivator. That unites progressives and moderates or people somewhere in between.
Papers over divisions.
It completely papers over divisions. I do think, though, I mean, if you're Donald Trump, why on earth would you step back at this point in time? I mean, if you look at all the polling over the last couple of months, yes.
There's no reason to step back,
There's no reason. Yes, he may have a low ceiling, right? But he has a high floor. You know, he doesn't.
He's always had a low ceiling.
He's always had a low ceiling. And his high floor means if you're him, you're calling up Nikki Haley and you're saying, come on in, the water's fine. Get on in, all these candidates, because what is bad for him would be running directly against Ron DeSantis.
So, Matt, I mean, this is where I come back. Trump can both be at his weakest moment he's been since he's been the leader of the party and also a juggernaut. Do you accept that?
Well, a couple things. He's a juggernaut until you beat him at the ballot box. He's not just going to disappear, right? Like,
well, don't you think that a bunch of leaders were hoping? I mean, I do think there was a bunch of Republican leaders that were going, boy, I hope this thing works. And then it's like, oh, that's not going to work.
But here's the thing.
I think they all have been hoping the referees would take him out of the
You would never be, Trump on a classified documents in a Republican primary. You simply weren't, right? He would cloak himself as a martyr and run. But one thing I did notice, New York Times popped this maybe about an hour ago, over a third of the committee members are open to an alternative.
But there's a difference between open to an alternative and working to get him out of the party.
Okay, but where were we a year ago? Where were we even before Election Day, right? The common refrain was we need somebody who can win. You wouldn't have heard that in October. You hear it now.
Because he lost.
Exactly. But his candidates did too.
But I guess what I'm coming back to is there was a moment I think you could have pushed him out of the party, and now I don't think you can.
But that moment on November 29th, it isn't because he's been, all over the place.
No, I know. It's just the opposite.
Because he doesn't blot out the sun anymore. Like, he doesn't. You don't get the coverage. He'll say whatever he wants on Truth Social. It's not being covered 24/7 by everybody. It's not.
I also think when you talk to actual voters, it's hard for me to think that there's someone who could push Donald Trump out of the party other than the actual Republican voters. I don't think that there's a person who can say we're going to be over with this. It has to be Republican voters saying, oh, guess guess what? Those midterms didn't work out for us. Neither did that presidential election. Is this a person that I want, or do I want someone who has Trump-like features? He talks like Trump, but actually isn't Trump. So I think it's a tough thing for any of the party, anyone in the Republican Party, to say we want to get rid of Trump without actually convincing voters that there's a great alternative for them.
Yeah. I guess the question, I mean, look, where it does. I don't know how you end up beating him, because I don't know how you get all these egos to agree not to run.
Because
unite behind one alternative.
Because there's no grand poobah of the party, right? No one is waiting for Ronna McDaniel, who's still the chair as of today, to call them and say, don't run. Donald Trump is not going to call them and say, don't run, because he doesn't want to be head-to-head with Ron DeSantis. So there's
But
nobody...
he also finds it disloyal when these people run against him.
Well, that's true. But at this point in time, more people running is better for him, because his hardcore people don't appear to be running away from him yet. We'll see.
All right, Matt, and why isn't there more outrage inside the Republican Party at how viciously and ugly his attacks are on Elaine Chao?
Well, to start, at least earlier, I believe a Politico story said that she intentionally wanted these attacks tamped down. She would tell people, please don't amplify them, because it just will amplify it more. I think, candidly, again, people don't want to amplify this sort of thing. It's not even that they don't want...
But the lack of I understand the amplification argument, right? We go through this all the time ourselves.
Yeah.
But he is not... I mean, nobody's denouncing him. Nobody in the party denounces him for this rhetoric. They just don't do it.
No, again, but as we talked about, though, the more, if Republicans were to come forward, and it's awful rhetoric, do not get me wrong at all, it would cause more of a story. They would become more and more places across...
right. I understand that.
Yeah.
And ergo, we can't seem to get out of our doom loop. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but how do we ever say something is, hey, you shouldn't... How do you ever teach the lesson? Because this is only encouraging others to do this.
To my point again, about talking about blotting out the sun. If this were if it was a couple of years ago, this would be the lead story. Instead, we're talking about the RNC race, a very processy position.
But it's not. But he's not getting penalized for it.
He's not getting penalized for it, but it's also nowhere drawing any of the coverage, rightly so, that it did before.
But they don't speak to it because people still fear the Trump base and Trump, and it is still a fundraising thing for them to still be seemingly on his side, even if they're horrified behind the scenes. I mean, nobody wants to be the target of Trump in the Republican Party.
I think the Nick Fuentes thing, the clips you played earlier, I think we're a very good case about how there's little downside in certain ways, if it's getting out the tension, to come out against it.
Which I mean, is it all due to Mitch McConnell? I mean, that's the only... If Elaine Chao were somebody else, would more people denounce it? I just don't... I understand your explanation, Matt. But Yamiche, it's hard to understand it.
If I had to lean on my reporting and talking to civil rights leaders, I would say that their critique of the Republican Party is that this is a party that has embraced language that mirrors this. This is also a party that elected someone who said that Mexicans were rapists and criminals, who talked about Baltimore and basically talked about the fact that black people were problematic. I mean, this isn't the first time that this is...
not at all. And I know we're numb to it, I guess.
I mean, that's what it is. It's that this is a party that is deciding not to call out that language. Maybe it's because, as Matt said, they don't want to amplify it. Maybe it's because they're secretly laughing about it in their living rooms. I can't say why people aren't calling it out, but based on my reporting and the sources that are the people who do the work in civil rights, it's because there's a deeper problem here, and he's using language that other people agree with but aren't saying out loud.
People aren't laughing about it. People aren't laughing about it. I promise you that.
No, but it feels like there's something going on.
There's greater incentive not to stick your head out. It's the same reason why Republicans hide from reporters on the Hill when any given Trump tweet or outrageous thing he says comes up, because they'd rather not say anything at all about it. In most cases.
It is easier to keep your head down, because when you're in the barrel, it sucks. All right, Yamiche, Jen, and Matt, I do think, like I said, I'm still just sort of, wow, Ron DeSantis is trying to use political capital. I'm still blown away. I know, I didn't know he was capable of expressing an opinion that could blow up in his face. We'll find out. All right.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.